Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was recruited into the Suicide Squad with a bomb in his neck. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The first thing to return was the smell. It was a scent that scraped the inside of his nose, sterile and sharp, the ghost of antiseptic trying and failing to cover the deeper, metallic tang of recycled air and old stone. It was the smell of a place scrubbed clean, but never truly pure. The second was the sound, a low, persistent hum that vibrated through the base of his skull. It was the sound of immense power held in check, of ventilation systems and humming servers and the quiet, ever-present thrum of a cage. The third was the feeling. Cold. A deep, penetrating cold that had less to do with the temperature of the room and more to do with the hard, unyielding surface he was lying on. No, not lying. He was upright, strapped. Izuku Midoriya's eyes snapped open, white. Everything was white. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, all were made of a seamless, non-reflective polymer that swallowed light and sound. He was seated in a chair that felt more like a medical apparatus, thick restraints of a similar white material binding his wrists, ankles, and torso. His head was held in place by a padded brace. He tried to struggle, a primal instinct kicking in, but the restraints didn't give a millimeter. They were as unyielding as the silence. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. He tried to summon one for all. Nothing. It wasn't the usual feeling of the power simply not responding. It was worse. It felt hollow. A void where a star used to be. He could feel the barest, most distant echo of the quirks, the vestiges of the past users silent and unreachable, as if he were shouting to them from across a vast, empty chasm. A profound sense of loss, more terrifying than any physical threat, washed over him. They had taken it. Or they had found a way to completely sever his connection to it. He took a ragged breath, the antiseptic smell filling his lungs, and tried to remember. The fight. The ambush. It hadn't been villains, not in the traditional sense, not Shigaraki's hordes or All for One's lieutenants. It had been precise. Clinical. Figures in black tactical gear, faceless behind smoked visors. They hadn't used flashy quirks. They had used technology, suppression grenades that filled the air with a cloying, energy-draining mist, and projectiles that deployed nets of crackling, quirk-negating energy. He had fought back, black whip lashing out, air force blasts shattering the pavement, but they had been relentless, coordinated. He'd been overwhelmed, a needle pricking his neck, and then, this white, silent tomb. Slowly, deliberately, he took stock of his own body. The familiar aches and pains from years of pushing his quirk past its limits were there, a dull chorus of old injuries. But there was something new, a weight. A cold, metallic weight around his neck. He tried to crane his head down, but the brace held him fast. He could feel it against his skin, a perfect, uncomfortably smooth circle of metal. It wasn't a simple slave collar. It felt advanced, a subtle vibration humming from it that seemed to sync with the hum of the room, the source of the terrible emptiness where his power should be. A section of the white wall in front of him shimmered, turning translucent and then perfectly clear, revealing an observation room on the other side. A single figure stood there, silhouetted against the dimmer light. The figure stepped forward, and a hidden door hissed open to Izuku's left. The woman who entered moved with an unnerving economy of motion. She was in her late 40s, perhaps, with severe, charcoal black hair pulled into a tight bun that seemed to pull at the skin of her temples. Her face was sharp angles and pale skin, her eyes a shade of gray so dark they were almost black, holding an intelligence that was as cold and sharp as a shard of obsidian. She wore a perfectly tailored, dark gray suit, the kind of attire that spoke of immense authority and a complete lack of flamboyance. She held a tablet in one hand, her steps making no sound on the polymer floor. She stopped a few feet in front of him, her gaze sweeping over him not as a person, but as a problem to be analyzed. Izuku Midoriya. Quirk, one for all. Age 20, status, national threat, asset of interest, and, as of 12 hours ago, property of the Japanese post-conflict provisional government. Her voice was as calm and sterile as the room, each word a carefully placed surgical instrument. Izuku's own voice was a dry rasp. Where am I? Who are you? You are in a repurposed maximum security wing of Tartarus, she said, her eyes never leaving his. But parts of it that All for One and his successor did not see fit to completely annihilate. As for who I am, you may call me Director Kageyama, Tartarus. The name sent another jolt of ice through his veins. You're with the government? The government fell, a flicker of something, not quite a smile, more like the faint glimmer of satisfaction on a predator's face, touched her lips. The Hero Public Safety Commission fell. The elected government was a puppet stage that had its strings cut. But a nation, Midoriya, is a stubborn organism. It doesn't die so easily. When a limb is severed, the body learns to function without it. We are what remains. A collection of pragmatists from the ashes of the HPSC, the Ministry of Defense, and various international intelligence agencies who understand the new reality. She tapped her tablet, and the wall behind her lit up, transforming into a massive, high-definition screen. The first image was one that was seared into Izuku's nightmares. The skyline of a burning city, a colossal figure standing atop a skyscraper, arms outstretched in triumph. All for One, in a perfected host body, radiating an aura of absolute power. The Great Fall, as the history books will one day call it, was 3 years ago, Kageyama said, her voice a detached narration. All for One. Decisively, the image changed. A photo of a shattered monument, the remnants of the All Might statue that had once stood as a symbol of peace. Its head was missing, its triumphant pose now a mockery. All Might is dead. He died protecting a shelter of civilian evacuees in Kamino. A noble, but ultimately futile, gesture. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. He knew. He had felt it through One for All, a cataclysmic severing, a light winking out of existence across the country. But hearing it stated so baldly, so clinically, felt like a physical blow. Kageyama was merciless. The images kept coming. The ruins of Yue High, its iconic glass arches shattered, the main building a blackened husk, a grainy satellite photo of Endeavor, broken and chained, being paraded through the streets by Dabi. A list of names scrolling on the screen under the heading, deceased or incarcerated. Hawks. Best Jeanist, Mirko. Ryukyu. The names of his teachers, his mentors, his heroes. Most pro-heroes are gone. Kageyama continued, her voice unwavering. Those who weren't killed in the final battle were hunted down. Those who surrendered are now tools for the new regime. The rest are in hiding. Powerless. Irrelevant. And my friends? Izuku's voice cracked on the last word. The other students? Kageyama's cold eyes met his. Unknown. Some are presumed dead. Others were captured. A few may have escaped the country. For all intents and purposes they are gone. You are the last piece of the Age of Heroes still on the board. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. You fought well for a time. Your one-man vigilante war was a nuisance to All for One's territorial expansion. You became a symbol. A ghost story villains told their underlings. The Green Reaper. But you were just one man. You were losing Midoriya. Bleeding out? We did you a favor by taking you off the field. A favor? He choked out, rage finally bubbling past the shock. You ambushed me. You strapped me to a chair and put this thing on my neck. Yes. This thing, Kageyama said, stepping closer. She reached out a slender finger and tapped the metal collar. It sent a jolt of cold, not electricity, through him. A marvel of engineering. It's a multi-stage quirk suppressant, and a high-yield nanite explosive. The inner layer floods your system with suppressant particles, muting your connection to One for All. We can't erase the quirk, of course. It's too ingrained in your DNA, but we can put it in a straitjacket. The outer layer contains several grams of plasticized octanitrocubane, delivered via a swarm of injectable nanites upon detonation. The blast is localized. It will sever your head from your shoulders with surgical precision. It's synced to your biometrics, a remote server, and my personal command. She held up her tablet. On the screen was a simple interface, a live readout of his heart rate and brain activity next to a large, crimson-red virtual button labeled Terminate. One wrong move, she said softly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. One act of defiance, one attempt to escape, one failure to comply with a direct order, and Japan loses its last hero. Messily, the sheer, monstrous pragmatism of it all left him breathless. They weren't villains in the way he understood them. They didn't want chaos or destruction. They wanted control. They saw him not as a person, but as a weapon of mass destruction that had been running wild, and they had just put the safety on. "What do you want from me?" he finally managed to ask, the words tasting like ash. "The same thing you want, Midoriya." "We want to fight back," Kageyama said, her expression unchanging. "All for One's Japan is a patchwork of territories ruled by his most powerful lieutenants. It's unstable, a feudal system built on fear. We, Project Chimera, exist to exploit that instability. We are the scalpel that will cut the rot from the heart of this new empire. But a scalpel needs a sharp edge," she gestured to him. "You are that edge." She offered him a choice that was no choice at all. "You can sit in this room. We'll keep you alive, fed and powerless, until All for One's forces inevitably find this facility and kill you to take your quirk, or you can serve Japan one last time. You can use the power we allow you to use, when we allow you to use it, and fight for a world that might one day be worth living in again. You will be part of a new unit, Task Force X. You will undertake missions deemed too dangerous, too sensitive, or too morally compromising for any conventional force." The word Suicide Squad screamed in his mind. "So I'm your attack dog," he spat. "A slave." "You are a soldier," she corrected him, her tone sharp. "In a war we cannot afford to lose. Your idealism died with All Might. Your sentimentality died with UA. All that is left is the quirk. We are giving you the chance to aim it." Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Izuku's mind raced. To rot in this cell was to die, to accept was to become a monster's tool, a puppet dancing on the strings of a cold-hearted tyrant who wore the mask of a savior. But to accept was to be on the outside. It was a chance, however slim, to find an opening. To learn their weaknesses. To find his friends. To break free. To fight. He had to play their game. He met her gaze, the fires of defiance banked but not extinguished. "Fine." The word was a stone dropping into a deep well. Kageyama nodded once, a curt, businesslike gesture. "Wise decision." She turned and spoke to an unseen presence. "Release him. Prep him for briefing." The restraints retracted into the chair with a series of soft clicks. The brace on his head pulled back. Izuku slowly, stiffly, pushed himself to his feet. The collar was a constant, chilling reminder of his new reality. His muscles felt weak, the absence of one for all's energizing hum making him feel fragile, human. 2 guards in the same black tactical gear as his captors entered the room. They didn't speak, simply gesturing for him to walk between them. They led him out of the white room and into a long, gray corridor. The air here was colder, the stone of Tartarus visible beneath the new tech paneling. It was a tomb, repurposed into a command center. They arrived at a heavy steel door that Iris said opened into a circular briefing room. A large, round table made of dark, polished metal dominated the space. Around it, 4 figures were already seated. The sight of them made Izuku's blood run cold. The first was a mountain of a man, his scarred, muscular frame barely contained by the reinforced chair. His wild, spiky blonde hair and the sadistic grin stretching across his face were instantly recognizable. Goto Masuji. Muscular. The man who had reveled in the thought of killing a child. He looked up as Izuku entered, his single eye glinting with malicious glee. "Well, well. Look what the cat dragged in, the little hero who couldn't." To his right, perched on her chair with an unsettling, childlike energy, was a girl with messy blonde buns and wide, fever-bright eyes. She wore a standard-issue gray jumpsuit, but it couldn't hide the manic glee that radiated from her. Himiko Toga. Her gaze locked onto Izuku, and a disturbingly wide smile spread across her face, revealing her sharp canines. "Izuku-kun!" she chirped, her voice a sing-song of delight. "I knew we'd be together again. I'm so happy I could just burst. We're going to have so much fun." Her joy was more terrifying than Muscular's open aggression. Izuku's eyes scanned past her, and his breath caught in his throat. Leaning back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, was a man wrapped in bandages, only his intense, fanatic eyes and the tattered red scarf around his neck visible. Kaizo Makaguro. Stain. The hero killer. He was supposed to be in Tartarus, paralyzed and imprisoned. He looked anything but. His gaze was a physical weight, dissecting Izuku, judging him, measuring his worth against some impossible, bloody standard. He said nothing, which was somehow the most menacing response of all. The final member of this grotesque assembly was the one Izuku least expected. Hunched over a datapad built into the table, furiously typing away, was a small woman with bright pink hair tied into a heart-shaped loop. Aiko Kumnari. La Brava. She looked broken. The vibrant, lovesick energy he remembered from his encounter with her and gentle criminal was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed cynicism. She didn't even look up as he entered, her entire world seemingly reduced to the lines of code on her screen. This was his team. A bloodthirsty killer, an obsessive psychopath, a dogmatic zealot, and a broken-hearted hacker. Izuku felt a wave of nausea. He took a step back, but the guards behind him were an immovable wall. "Welcome to Task Force X, Midoriya." Kageyama's voice echoed from a speaker in the ceiling. She was observing, always observing. "Your new squadmates. Each has been deemed too valuable to terminate, and too dangerous to be left to their own devices. Like you, they serve in exchange for the privilege of continued existence." Muscular slammed a fist on the table, making it boom like a drum. "Enough with the speeches, lady! When do we get to break something?" "Patience, Imasuji," Kageyama's voice replied, laced with ice. "Your leash is short for a reason." Stain finally spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that scraped the air. "So this is the Great Hope. The successor to the symbol of peace. Reduced to a collared dog, forced to stand with the very filth he once swore to oppose. How fitting for this sham of a world." His eyes burned into Izuku. "Tell me, boy, does your soul still burn with the fire of a true hero? Or have they finally snuffed it out?" Before Izuku could form a response, a holographic map materialized over the center of the table. It depicted a sprawling industrial complex. "Your first mission," Kageyama announced, her tone shifting back to pure business. "The Kasai Water Treatment and Purification Plant. It supplies fresh water to 3 sectors of the Western Bloc, including a sector known for harboring a significant resistance cell. The plant has been seized by a villain. One you are familiar with, Midoriya." An image appeared next to the map. A gelatinous, vaguely humanoid figure made of brown sludge, with 2 beady yellow eyes. "The sludge villain." Izuku breathed, a distant memory of a sewer and Bakugo's desperate, explosive struggles flashing in his mind. "He's evolved," Kageyama stated. "All for One gifted him several minor quirks to enhance his mass, density control, and toxicity. He now calls himself Sludge. He has taken the plant staff hostage and is threatening to introduce a potent neurotoxin into the water supply if his demands for territory are not met. The new regime is content to let him, as it would wipe out the resistance in the area. We are not." She zoomed in on the plant's central control room. "Your objective is simple: infiltrate the facility, neutralize the threat, and secure the controls. The method is at your discretion. The result is not." A timer appeared on the holographic display. 2 hours. "You have 2 hours from deployment. Fail, and thousands of civilians will die a horrific death. And then, as a consequence for your failure, I will detonate your collars." One by one, the finality of her words hung in the air like poison. Izuku looked from the map to the faces of his new team. Muscular was grinning, cracking his knuckles. Toga was practically vibrating with excitement, her eyes locked on Izuku's neck. Stain was watching him with that same intense, unreadable gaze, his hand resting near the hilt of his katana. La Brava hadn't moved, her fingers still flying across her console, a silent, disconnected ghost. This wasn't a team of heroes. This wasn't a chance for redemption. This was a circle of hell, and he had just been pushed into its center. He was surrounded by monsters, commanded by a devil, with a bomb wrapped around his neck. The weight of it, the cold, smooth metal against his skin, felt heavier than the entire world he had once tried to carry on his shoulders. This was his reality now. And one wrong move was the end of everything. The holographic map of the Kasai water treatment plant pulsed with a malevolent, chemical green light in the center of the briefing room. It cast long, distorted shadows across the faces of its unwilling audience, painting them in hues of sickness and dread. The 2-hour timer ticked down with the chilling finality of a headsman's clock. Silence, thick and heavy, followed Director Kageyama's pronouncement. It was a silence filled with the unspoken thoughts of monsters and a fallen hero, all bound by the same invisible chain. It was Muscular who broke it, the sound of his laughter a harsh, ugly thing, like rocks grinding together. Heh. Hey. A sludge villain? That's our big, scary mission? The new top dog of Japan has us hunting down bargain bin sewer trash. He leaned forward, his massive forearms resting on the table, the metal groaning in protest. Let me go in alone. I'll turn the whole place into a crater in 5 minutes. Mission accomplished. Pop the collars. Easy. Your easy solution, Imasuji, would rupture the primary water mains and contaminate the entire quadrant's reservoir, poisoning the very people we are trying to protect. Kageyama's disembodied voice cut through the air, sharp as broken glass. Furthermore, it would destroy the facility, a vital piece of pre-fall infrastructure we intend to reclaim. You are a sledgehammer. This mission requires a scalpel. You will follow the plan. What plan? Muscular sneered, gesturing with a thumb at Izuku. His? The crying hero who couldn't even beat me when he had help? Izuku flinched, the memory of Kuda, of shattered arms and desperate, tearing power, flashing in his mind. He straightened his back, forcing the tremor from his hands. He was no longer that boy. He couldn't afford to be. We need a coordinated approach, Izuku said, his voice steadier than he felt. He pointed to the holographic map. La Brava, without being asked, manipulated her data pad. The map zoomed in, schematics and ventilation shafts glowing in blue. Her competence was a small island of stability in a sea of chaos. The facility is old, built before widespread quirk warfare was a primary design concern. Izuku began, falling back on the familiar cadence of strategic analysis, a coping mechanism he'd honed over years of study. Its security is concentrated at the main entrances and the central control room. The northern wall adjoins a decommissioned overflow channel. According to these schematics, it's a structural weak point. We can make a silent entry there. From there, we move through the service corridors, disabling guards non-lethally, and secure the control room before Sludge even knows we're inside. Non-lethally? Muscular mouthed the words as if they were a foreign, disgusting food. He snorted, a plume of hot air. You're still playing that game? Kid, look around. The good guys lost. The rulebook you loved so much got shredded and set on fire. The only rule now is who's strongest. He is a fool clinging to a dead dream. Stain's voice rasped from the shadows of his bandages. He hadn't moved a muscle, but his presence seemed to suck the warmth from the air. Yet, your way is equally flawed, muscle-bound simpleton. Your lust for mindless destruction is just another form of poison. It is the action of a villain, not a cleanser. True strength is not in the crushing of bone, but in the conviction of the soul. Muscular's eye swiveled to Stain, a low growl rumbling in his chest. You want to talk about conviction, bandage freak? My conviction is that I like fighting. I like winning. It's simple. It's honest. You and your little speeches are just excuses to cut people up. Don't pretend you're any different from me. There is a chasm between us. Stain hissed, leaning forward just enough for the light to catch the feverish intensity in his eyes. You are a disease. A mindless cancer that consumes for its own sake. I am the cure. I purge the unworthy. I excise the fakes who taint the name of villain and hero alike. He turned that burning gaze back to Izuku. And I have yet to determine which you are, Izuku Midoriya, a relic of a failed system, or the last ember of a true fire. Oh, can you two stop? Toga suddenly chimed in, her voice slicing through the tension with cheerful absurdity. She kicked her feet back and forth like a child on a swing. All this talking is so boring. I just want to see what Izuku-kun looks like when he's fighting for his life again. His face gets all tight and sweaty, and his eyes get so big and full of blood. It's the best. She sighed dreamily, a faint blush on her cheeks. Can I cut the guards? Just a little? I'm so thirsty. It's been ages since I had a good drink. Her words hung in the air, a testament to the fractured, impossible nature of the team. A brute, a zealot, a psychopath, and... Izuku looked at La Brava. She was still typing, her expression blank, but he could see the slight tension in her jaw. She was a ghost at the feast, trapped with the ghouls. This was untenable. This collection of conflicting motives and violent impulses would get them all killed, and thousands of civilians along with them. He had to draw a line. Not for them. For himself. For the memory of the hero he was supposed to be. He planted his hands on the table, his knuckles white. The metal was cold against his skin. I have one rule, he said, his voice low but clear, cutting through the lingering madness of Toga's outburst. My one and only condition for any of this to work. He met each of their gazes in turn. Muscular sneer. Toga's curious, tilted head. Stain's penetrating stare. We do not kill, Izuku declared. We capture. We incapacitate. We neutralize the threat, but we do not take a life. Not the guards, not the villain. No one dies. That is my rule. The silence that followed was a different kind. It was a stunned, disbelieving silence. Then Muscular threw his head back and roared with laughter. It was a deep, guttural, mocking sound that filled the entire room. Ha! You've got to be kidding me. Kid, the bomb in your neck didn't scramble your brains, did it? They sent us, on this mission because they want people to get hurt. We're the bloody, messy option, Stain scoffed, a dry, dismissive sound. Naive. To the very end. You still believe you can hold back the tide with a teacup. This world, the one All for One has forged, is built on death. To refuse to kill is to refuse to fight. It is a weakness that will see you, and anyone foolish enough to follow you, slaughtered. But killing is the fun part. Toga pouted, her lower lip trembling theatrically. If you don't let them bleed, how can you love them? How can you become them? Izuku's resolve hardened. I don't care. This is the line. We don't cross it. An admirable, if utterly pointless, sentiment, Midoriya. Kageyama's voice descended upon them again, colder and sharper than ever. The holographic timer seemed to tick a fraction louder. But you are mistaken. You do not set the rules of engagement. I do. Let me make them clear for all of you, so there is no confusion. The map vanished, replaced by a simple, stark text document. Rules of Engagement, Task Force X. 1. Primary objective is paramount. Mission completion is the only metric of success. 2. Direct orders will be obeyed instantaneously and without question. Insubordination is grounds for immediate termination. 3. Collateral damage is an accepted operational reality. The lives of hostiles, and in some cases civilians, are secondary to the completion of the primary objective. Lethal force is authorized and, in many scenarios, encouraged for efficiency. Izuku stared at the words, a cold dread coiling in his stomach. It was his worst fears codified, turned into official doctrine. Encouraged for efficiency. The phrase made him feel sick. Your no-kill rule is not only rejected, it is a direct contradiction of your operational parameters. Kageyama stated, her voice devoid of any emotion. If you attempt to enforce it at the expense of the mission, I will detonate your collar for gross insubordination. If a situation arises where eliminating a target is the most efficient path to success and you hesitate, I will detonate your collar for dereliction of duty. If your moral posturing results in the failure of the mission, I will detonate all of your collars as a lesson to your future replacements. She let that sink in. The threat was absolute, the cage of her control snapping shut around him, around all of them. Your heroism is a liability, Midoriya, she finished, her voice a razor's edge. Adapt to the new reality, or you will be discarded as another one of its casualties. Understood? He couldn't speak. He could only nod, a slow, jerky movement. The weight of the collar seemed to double, pressing down on his spine, forcing him to bow to her logic. He had no choice. He had no power. He was a weapon, and she held the trigger. Excellent, Kageyama said. La Brava, transmit the detailed infiltration paths and security overrides to Midoriya's tactical pad. You all have 10 minutes to gear up. Deployment is in 11 minutes. Dismissed. The holographic display winked out, plunging the room back into its grim, gray state. Muscular shoved his chair back with a screech of metal on metal, a triumphant, savage grin on his face. He walked past Izuku, deliberately slamming a shoulder into him. Looks like the little hero is going to have to get his hands dirty. Welcome to the real world, kid. Toga skipped past, humming her cheerful, discordant tune. Don't worry, Izuku-kun. I'll be extra neat for you, she said, winking before disappearing through the door. Stain rose to his feet with a fluid, silent motion. He paused as he drew level with Izuku. She is a monster, he murmured, his voice low enough that only Izuku could hear. But she speaks the truth of this age. Now we will see. We will see if the soul of a hero can survive when its body is forced to commit sin. He followed the others out, leaving Izuku alone with the ghost. La Brava finally pushed back from the table. Her datapad went dark. She stood up, her small frame looking even smaller in the oppressive room. She wouldn't meet his eyes, her gaze fixed on the floor. For a moment, Izuku thought she would just walk past him like the others. But she stopped. The gear room is down the hall. Third door on the left, she said, her voice a monotone whisper, devoid of its former passion. Your tactical gear is in locker 09. My hacks will be routed through the comms unit in your helmet. I'll be guiding you from the transport. La Brava. Izuku started, his own voice sounding hollow. I don't. She cut him off, finally looking up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, haunted. The playful heart-shaped pupils he remembered were dull, lifeless. Don't say you're sorry. Don't say it's going to be okay. Don't try to be a hero. He was a hero. Her voice cracked, a fissure in her carefully constructed wall of apathy. He was kind and theatrical, and he believed in making people smile. Look where it got him. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. They killed him. The villains. Broke him in the street for sport. So just stop. Stop trying to be him. Stop trying to be All Might. They're dead. All the heroes are dead. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing softly in the cavernous room, leaving Izuku standing alone with the ghosts of his past and the terrifying reality of his future. The armory was as soulless as the rest of the facility. White walls, gray metal lockers, and the pervasive smell of gun oil and ozone. Weapons were racked with cold, geometric precision, pulse rifles, concussion grenades, combat knives, a frightening array of tools designed for one purpose: to end a life efficiently. His locker, number 09, was already open. Inside, a suit of black tactical gear was hung neatly. It wasn't a hero costume. It was a uniform. The fabric was a matte black, non-reflective composite material, designed to absorb light and sensor scans. It was segmented with plates of lightweight, bullet-resistant ceramic over the chest, back, and limbs. There was a helmet with a smoked, opaque visor, its interior no doubt packed with comms and a heads-up display. It was the uniform of a covert operative, an assassin. Anonymity was its core design principle. He stripped off the gray jumpsuit, his movements slow, deliberate. The collar on his neck felt like a brand, a permanent mark of his servitude. As he pulled on the tactical pants and the form-fitting undershirt, he felt like he was shedding his own skin. He was erasing Izuku Midoriya, erasing Deku, the hero who saves. He was putting on a costume of someone else, someone he never wanted to be. His old costume, with its vibrant green, its reassuring smile-shaped mask, its connection to his mother, to All Might, it felt a world away. A relic from a different lifetime. He wondered what they had done with it. Probably incinerated it. Another piece of the past turned to ash. His hand went to a small, hidden pocket sewn into the hem of his jumpsuit. His fingers closed around a tiny, folded piece of fabric. Carefully, he pulled it out. It was a small, tattered strip of cloth, no bigger than his thumb, in faded shades of red, white, and blue. A piece of All Might's costume, torn from the sleeve during one of their earliest, most desperate training sessions. He'd kept it all this time, a secret talisman. A reminder of the promise he had made. You can become a hero! The memory of All Might's voice, skeletal and weak but filled with unwavering belief, echoed in his mind. It was a painful, beautiful sound. With trembling fingers, Izuku tucked the tiny scrap of cloth into an inner seam of his new tactical gloves. A hidden, defiant piece of his soul, buried within the shell of his new existence. It was all he had left of himself. He finished gearing up, the helmet the last piece. When he settled it over his head, the world turned into a sterile, digital overlay. A faint hum filled his ears, and data began to scroll across the inside of his visor, his own biometrics, a comms link status, and a direct feed from the timer on his collar, now reading 01:48:17. It was a permanent fixture in the corner of his vision, a constant reminder of the sword hanging over his head. He looked at his reflection in the polished surface of a weapons locker. He didn't see himself. He saw a faceless soldier, a black silhouette. A ghost. The other members of the squad were already prepared. Muscular wore only a pair of reinforced tactical pants and heavy boots, his torso bare, showcasing the terrifying mass of muscle fibers that served as his only armor. He was idly flexing, the muscles across his back and shoulders coiling and uncoiling like nests of pythons. Toga had traded her jumpsuit for a dark, form-fitting stealth suit, and was strapping canisters and tubes to a harness on her back, her blood-sucking machine now a more compact, militarized version. She carefully polished a set of wicked-looking combat knives, humming that same unnerving tune. Stain was a vision in tattered black and crimson. He checked the edge of his katana, his movements precise and ritualistic. He had an array of throwing knives strapped to his thighs and chest. He was a walking arsenal of bladed weapons, an artist preparing his tools for a bloody masterpiece. They were a collection of nightmares, geared up for war. And he was one of them. "Move out!" A guard's voice barked from the doorway. They filed out in silence, walking down another long corridor towards a hangar bay. The air grew colder, tasting of diesel and exhaust fumes. The bay housed a single vehicle, a sleek, angular transport craft painted in a matte, radar-absorbent black. It had no visible windows or markings, its design brutalist and efficient. The ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a cramped interior with 6 seats bolted to the floor. La Brava was already strapped into a station at the front, surrounded by glowing monitors and holographic interfaces. She didn't look up as they boarded. Izuku took a seat, the magnetic clamps of the harness clicking shut over his chest. Muscular sat opposite him, cracking his neck with a loud pop. Toga took the seat right next to Izuku, far too close for comfort, her leg pressing against his. He could feel her vibrating with suppressed excitement. Stain took a seat in the corner, immediately falling into a state of meditative stillness, his eyes closed. The ramp hissed shut, sealing them in near total darkness, the only light coming from the green and blue glow of La Brava's consoles and the red data scrolling on Izuku's HUD. The low hum of the engines deepened into a powerful thrum that vibrated through the deck plates. With a lurch, the transport lifted off the ground. They were on their way. The journey was suffocating. The silence in the small space was a living thing, broken only by the hum of the engines and the soft, almost inaudible clicks of La Brava's keyboard. Izuku stared at the schematics on his HUD, trying to run through the plan, but his mind was a maelstrom of Kageyama's threats and La Brava's broken words. All the heroes are dead. Was she right? Was he just a corpse clinging to a code that no longer mattered? A ghost haunting the ruins of a better world? A soft sound pulled him from his dark thoughts. It was quiet, cheerful, and utterly out of place. Toga was humming. It was a simple, happy little tune, the kind a child might hum on their way to school. In the dark, cramped silence of the transport, surrounded by killers and heading towards a mission where he was expected to become one, it was the most horrifying sound Izuku had ever heard. It was the sound of a world gone mad, and he was strapped in for the ride. The descent was silent. The stealth transport, a predator carved from shadow and silence, shed altitude without a whisper, its advanced gravitic dampeners absorbing every shudder and lurch. Inside the cramped troop bay, the only sounds were the soft, rhythmic clicks of La Brava's fingers on her holographic console and the frantic thumping of Izuku Midoriya's own heart against his ribs. The timer on his HUD, a constant, damning companion in the corner of his vision, read 01:34:12. Approaching the designated entry point. La Brava's voice, filtered through the comms, was flat and professional, a stark contrast to the broken girl he'd spoken to earlier. It was a mask, he realized, just as his own helmet was. A way to cope. External security sensors are looping. Perimeter cameras are feeding them a pre-recorded image of an empty canal. You have a 90-second window from the moment the ramp drops before the system's diagnostic AI flags the anomaly. Move fast. Acknowledged, Izuku said, his own voice sounding alien and tinny in his ears. He looked across the narrow space. Muscular was stretching his neck, a hungry, predatory grin fixed on his face. Toga was bouncing in her seat, a tightly coiled spring of manic energy. Stain was a statue of lethal intent, his eyes closed, his breathing imperceptible. Rules of engagement are as I stated. Izuku broadcast over the squad channel, a last, desperate attempt to assert some semblance of order. We move silent. We neutralize, we do not eliminate. We stick to the plan. Muscular just chuckled, a low, contemptuous rumble. Toga gave a little two-fingered salute. Stain didn't react at all. The transport came to a dead stop, hovering mere feet above a wide, concrete drainage canal slick with moss and grime. The air in the bay suddenly felt thick, expectant. Ramp down in 3, 2, 1, with a hydraulic hiss, the ramp lowered, revealing the cold night. The air that rushed in was thick with the smell of decay, stagnant water, and industrial chemicals, the breath of a sick city. The canal wall, exactly as the schematics had shown, was a patchwork of older concrete and newer repairs, a network of hairline fractures spiderwebbing across its surface. The weak point. Go! Izuku commanded, vaulting over the ramp's edge and landing silently on the damp concrete below. The others followed, moving with a speed and grace that was terrifying in its own right. Muscular landed with a heavy, solid thud, cracking the ground beneath his boots. Stain, you're on point, Izuku directed, his voice a low whisper. Your senses are the sharpest for this kind of work. Toga, rear guard. Watch our trail. Muscular, you're with me, but you are a battering ram, not a firecracker. You do not break anything unless I give the word. Is that clear? Muscular shot him a look of pure insolence but gave a grunting shrug that could have been agreement. It would have to do. Stain melted into the shadows of the canal without a word, his tattered scarf blending into the darkness. He moved with an unnatural fluidity, less a man walking and more a phantom drifting over the ground. A moment later, a single, sharp hand signal from the shadows indicated the way was clear. They moved in. The entry point was a large, circular maintenance hatch sealed with a rusted, heavy wheel. Izuku gripped it, but before he could turn, a blur of motion came from behind him. Muscular shoved him aside. Too slow, hero, he grunted. With one hand he gripped the wheel and tore it clean off its moorings, the shriek of tortured metal echoing unnervingly in the confined space. He tossed the heavy iron disc aside like a frisbee. Izuku gritted his teeth, the first spike of frustration flaring hot in his chest. I said silent. It's off now, ain't it? Muscular sneered, kicking the now open hatch. Let's go. They slipped into the facility. The interior was a labyrinth of dripping pipes, narrow metal catwalks, and the constant, low hum of machinery. The air was cool and damp, carrying the faint, clean scent of ozone from the purification systems, a scent that was now tainted with the threat of poison. Stain led them through the service tunnels, his movements a masterclass in stealth. He would pause, tilting his head, before signaling them forward or waving them into an alcove. Twice they pressed themselves into the shadows as patrols of armed guards passed by, their boots clanging on the metal floors. These weren't AFO's elite. They were thugs, hired guns in mismatched gear, their posture lazy, their conversations bored. They were expendable. They reached a T-junction. Stain held up a hand, peering around the corner. He gestured, two hostiles stationary, backs turned. This was it. The first test. Stain, with me, Izuku whispered. Pressure points and restraints only. He received a curt nod. The two of them rounded the corner in perfect sync. The guards were leaning against the railing, sharing a cigarette, complaining about their pay. They never knew what hit them. Izuku moved like a phantom, a whisper of his former self. He didn't dare touch one for all, not yet. He relied on pure technique, the muscle memory drilled into him by Aizawa and Gran Torino. He closed the distance in 3 silent steps, his left arm snaking around one guard's throat, his right hand applying precise, needle-like pressure to the nerve cluster at the base of the man's neck. The guard went limp without a sound, his cigarette dropping to the floor with a faint hiss. Beside him, Stain was even more efficient. There was no wasted motion, just a fluid arc as he stepped behind the second guard and brought the pommel of his blade down in a swift, brutal chop to the back of the skull. The man collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. It had worked. Perfect synchronization. No alarms. No deaths. A small, fragile spark of hope flickered in Izuku's chest. Maybe this was possible. Maybe he could steer this runaway train of monsters. He pulled a set of zip ties from his belt and began securing the unconscious guards. "See?" he said, a hint of relief in his voice. "This is how we do it. Clean. Efficient. No one has to." He was cut off by a frustrated growl from behind him. "This is boring." Muscular stepped forward, his patience clearly evaporated. Before Izuku could react, he strode towards a heavy, reinforced steel door at the end of the corridor, the next checkpoint on their path. "La Brava, what's the bypass code for this door?" Izuku asked into his comms, scrambling to his feet. "Working on it," her voice replied. "It's an older magnetic lock system, heavily shielded. Give me 30 seconds. Don't need 30 seconds, Muscular declared, a wide, manic grin splitting his face. Got a better key. Muscular, N.O. Wait! Izuki yelled, lunging forward. He was too late. With a roar that was more animal than human, Muscular's body erupted. Brownish-red muscle fibers, thick as ship's cables, burst from his skin, wrapping around his arm until it was a grotesque, oversized battering ram. He didn't bother with the lock. He didn't bother with the handle. He simply drew his arm back and punched the entire door. The impact was not a sound. It was a physical event. An explosion of metal and concrete that deafened Izuku and shook the entire structure. The reinforced steel door, frame and all, blew inward as if it were made of wet cardboard, ripping from its hinges and flying down the next corridor. It slammed into the far wall with a cataclysmic clang that echoed through the facility like the crack of doom. Shrapnel, razor-sharp shards of metal and chunks of concrete, sprayed the area. Izuku threw himself to the side, a piece of twisted steel shearing through the air where his head had been a second before. Then came the sirens. A cacophony of shrill, piercing alarms blared to life, accompanied by flashing red lights that painted the corridors in strokes of pure panic. A synthesized voice, cold and robotic, began to chant from overhead speakers. Warning! Level 4 breach detected in Sector Gamma. All security personnel to immediate battle stations. The silence was shattered. The plan was in ruins. Stealth was a forgotten dream. In the corridor beyond the obliterated doorway, 2 guards had been standing directly in the door's path. Or rather, where the door's path had been. Now, there was just a red smear on the floor and the far wall, mingled with the mangled, unrecognizable wreckage of the steel door. They hadn't even had time to scream. Izuku stared, his mind struggling to process the scene. The coppery scent of blood, sharp and sickening, hit him, cutting through the chemical smell of the plant. He felt a wave of nausea so powerful his knees buckled. His one rule. His one line. Broken, no, obliterated, in the first 10 minutes of the mission. By his own teammate. No! The word was a choked, horrified gasp. He turned on Muscular, his body trembling with a rage so pure it felt like ice. What did you do? I told you! I told you to wait! Muscular simply flexed his muscle-clad arm, the fibers contracting with a wet, squelching sound. He looked from the bloody mess on the wall to Izuku's horrified face, and he grinned. It was a wide, genuine, joyful grin. Oops, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. My finger slipped. Now the fun can start. Acceptable losses, Midoriya. Kageyama's voice, sharp and cold as a winter wind, cut through his comms, right into his skull. He flinched as if struck. The element of surprise is gone, she continued, her tone utterly devoid of sympathy. Your idealistic plan has failed. The enemy is alerted and converging on your position. The mission parameters have not changed. Secure the control room. Eliminate the target. Adapt or die. You have 1 hour and 21 minutes. Adapt. The word was a command. A threat. A death sentence for his ideals. The thudding of heavy boots echoed from down the hallways, growing louder. Shouted commands replaced the robotic announcer. They were coming. Toga giggled, a sound of pure, unadulterated delight. Oh goody! A party! And it's all for us! She drew her knives, the polished steel gleaming in the flashing red emergency lights. Stain let out a long, slow sigh, a sound of profound disappointment. The fool's way has failed. Now comes the butcher's work. He drew his katana, the blade whispering from its sheath. He gave Izuku a look that was equal parts pity and contempt. What will you do now, hero? What would he do? His mind was a vortex of horror, rage, and Kageyama's chilling ultimatum. He looked at the blood on the wall, at Muscular's gleeful face, at the timer ticking down on his HUD. He could freeze. He could let them all die. He could let Kageyama press the button, or he could adapt. A fire ignited in the pit of his stomach, burning away the nausea and the shock. It was a cold fire. A desperate fire. Fine. If he couldn't do this his way, he would do it theirs. But he would not become them. He would bend, but he would not break. He let the green lightning of One for All crackle to life around him, just a whisper of its true power. 5%. Just enough. The familiar energy flooded his limbs, a welcome anchor in the sea of chaos. Forward! He yelled, his voice raw. Through them! To the control room! Now! He burst into motion, a green blur under the strobing red lights. He was no longer the silent infiltrator. He was a storm. The first wave of guards rounded the corner, armed with automatic rifles. They opened fire, the hallway erupting in a deafening roar of gunfire. Izuku didn't slow down. Air Force! He roared, flicking his fingers. A compressed cannon of air, precisely aimed, slammed into the guards' weapons, not their bodies. Rifles were torn from their hands, sent spinning into the walls. He shot past them before they could recover, black whip lashing out from his arms. The tendrils of dark energy weren't blades. They were pythons. They wrapped around the guards, gagging them, binding their limbs, and plastering them to the corridor walls, disarmed and immobilized but alive. It was violent. It was brutal. But it wasn't lethal. He was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. A one-man army of non-lethal force. But his team was a slaughterhouse. Muscular was a force of nature. He charged headfirst into the thickest concentration of enemies, laughing as bullets sparked and ricocheted off his augmented muscle fibers. He wasn't just defeating them, he was reveling in their destruction. An arm became a spear of hardened muscle, impaling a guard and lifting him off his feet. A leg became a sledgehammer, kicking another man so hard his body folded around the limb before being sent flying into a concrete pillar with a sickening crunch. He was a living meat grinder, and the hallway ran red in his wake. Toga was a different kind of horror. She was a dancer in the abattoir. She weaved through the gunfire with a giddy, acrobatic grace, her knives flashing. A slice across a cheek to get a taste of blood, a stab into a thigh to cripple, a gleeful giggle as she dodged a wild swing. Then, she got what she wanted. A drop of blood from a burly, bearded guard captain. She darted back into an alcove, and a moment later, the same guard captain stepped out, a manic grin on his face that didn't belong. Hey! What are you all standing around for? Toga as the captain yelled to a group of guards further down the hall. The intruders went that way. Follow me! She led them on a wild goose chase down a side corridor, her deception sowing mass confusion. The sounds of infighting, confused shouts and panicked gunfire, echoed from the tunnel a moment later. It was brilliant. It was horrifying. And then there was Stain. If Muscular was a sledgehammer, and Toga was a poisoned dart, Stain was a scalpel. He moved in the periphery of the chaos, a phantom of vengeance. The guards seemed to barely register his presence before it was too late. He didn't engage in prolonged brawls. He was an artist of incapacitation. A flash of his blade, and a guard would suddenly scream, dropping his weapon to clutch a severed Achilles tendon. Another flicker of movement, and a man would collapse, paralyzed, a tiny throwing knife lodged in his shoulder, its tip coated in Stain's blood. He was crippling them, taking them out of the fight permanently, but he wasn't killing them. Not yet. Izuku saw him kick a gun away from a paralyzed guard's hand, his expression one of utter disgust. Stain was adhering to his own twisted code. And through it all, his intense eyes kept flicking back to Izuku, watching, judging. He saw Izuku use Black Whip to yank a guard out of the path of Muscular's rampage. He saw Izuku fire a precise Delaware smash to destroy a heavy machine gun emplacement without harming the man behind it. He saw it all. They were a symphony of violence, a clashing, grotesque orchestra of death and restraint. Izuku fought not only the enemy but his own teammates, his powers used as much to control the chaos as to press the attack. He erected a wall of Black Whip to shield Toga as she retreated from a hail of bullets. He used a targeted Air Force blast to knock Muscular off balance just before he could crush the skull of a surrendering guard. Enough, Imasuji! Izuku roared, landing between the cowering guard and the blood-soaked brute. He's down! We move on! Muscular's eye twitched, his bloodlust warring with the implicit threat of the bomb in his neck. Kageyama wanted the mission completed, and fighting their own team leader wasn't efficient. With a final, furious snarl, he spat on the ground next to the terrified guard and stormed past. You're no fun, hero. They carved a path of destruction and chaos through the facility. The pristine corridors became a war zone of broken bodies, shattered equipment, and the sticky sweet smell of blood. La Brava's voice was a constant, calm presence in their ears, guiding them through the bedlam. Take the next right. Catwalk C7. It leads directly to the primary filtration chamber. The control room is on the other side. They burst into a cavernous chamber, the size of a football stadium, filled with enormous cylindrical vats and a forest of pipes. The air hummed with the power of the machinery, and the clean smell of ozone was overpowering. Catwalks crisscrossed the vast space dozens of meters above the chamber floor, and on the catwalks, more guards were waiting for them, this time in better armor and with heavier weapons. They had set up a fortified position, a choke point. This is it, Izuku said, breathing heavily. He was covered in grime and sweat, but not blood. A small, hollow victory. We get through this, we're at the objective. He looked at his team. Muscular was panting, his body steaming, high on the adrenaline of the slaughter. Toga was licking a drop of blood from her knife, her eyes sparkling with madness. Stain stood slightly apart, his blade held ready, his gaze fixed on the enemy position. They were monsters. They were killers. They were his only allies, and he had to lead them into the heart of the storm. The timer on his vision burned, a relentless fire counting down the seconds to his potential success, or his ultimate failure. 00:58:43. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the recycled, ozonated air a poor substitute for the courage he so desperately needed. The real fight was about to begin. The filtration chamber was a cathedral of industry, vast and echoing. Its vaulted ceilings were lost in shadow, crisscrossed by a dizzying web of pipes and catwalks. The air, thick with the tang of ozone and the iron scent of spilled blood, hummed with the raw power of the machinery below. Strobing red emergency lights pulsed in a frantic, rhythmic beat, casting the scene in hellish shades of crimson and black. Ahead, at the far end of the main catwalk, a dozen guards had formed a makeshift barricade, their heavy-duty armor and pulse rifles glinting menacingly. Choke point! Stain's voice rasped over the comms, stating the obvious with grim finality. A fool's tactic, but effective against a direct assault. Direct assault is what I do best. Muscular roared, his voice a gleeful promise of violence. His body was already swelling, reddish-brown muscle fibers coiling over his arms and chest like enraged serpents. He was a living engine of destruction, eager to be unleashed. Don't just charge in, you idiot! Izuku snapped, his mind racing, trying to process the tactical nightmare before him. They're fortified. They'll tear you to pieces before you get halfway. Let them try! Muscular shot back, pounding his fists together with a sound like colliding boulders. He's the distraction. Izuku realized, the words forming even as the plan clicked into place in his mind. He switched to the squad channel. Alright, new plan. Muscular, you're up. Give them what they want, draw all their fire. Be big, be loud, but stay mobile. Don't let them pin you down. For the first time, an order to cause mayhem made Muscular's grin widen with genuine pleasure. Now you're talking, hero, Toga, Izuku continued. Use the chaos. Get into the pipework below the catwalk. They'll be focused on Muscular. You come up behind them. Sow confusion. Break their formation. Toga's voice was a delighted purr in his ear. A surprise party? For me? You shouldn't have, Izuku-kun. With a lithe, acrobatic flip, she swung over the railing and vanished into the shadowed labyrinth of pipes below, as comfortable in the industrial jungle as a predator in its element. Stain. You're with me, Izuku commanded. We'll advance under Muscular's cover. We take out the flanks while they're focused on the center. Go. There was no verbal response from Stain, only a flicker of movement as he melted into the shadows along the edge of the catwalk. His silence was its own form of assent. Do it! Izuku roared. With a bellow that shook the very foundations of the catwalk, Muscular charged. He was a terrifying spectacle, a tidal wave of raw, kinetic force. The guards at the barricade reacted instantly, a disciplined volley of crimson energy bolts and solid projectiles converging on his advancing form. The air filled with the sizzle of superheated plasma and the percussive thumps of high-caliber rounds. Impacts that would have turned a man to mist barely slowed Muscular down. The energy bolts splashed against his hyperdense muscle armor, dissipating in showers of angry sparks. Bullets flattened or ricocheted wildly. He was a force of nature, an avalanche of flesh and fury, and he was laughing through it all. While all eyes were on the monster, the phantoms went to work. Izuku surged forward, a green bolt of lightning against the red and black chaos. He kept low, using the girders and support beams of the catwalk for cover. One for all, full cowling at 8% was a controlled burn, propelling him forward at a speed the guards' targeting systems struggled to track. To his left, Stain was even more discreet, a deeper shadow moving within the larger ones, utterly silent. A guard on the left flank, mesmerized by Muscular's insane charge, suddenly grunted, his rifle clattering to the floor. He looked down to see a small, wicked-looking knife protruding from his shoulder joint, paralyzing his arm. Before he could turn, Stain was on him, a blur of motion that ended with a swift, precise chop to the neck. The guard crumpled. On the right, Izuku saw another guard pivot, his rifle swinging towards him. Izuku didn't hesitate. Black Whip erupted from his arm, not as a bludgeon, but as a snare. It snaked around the rifle's barrel, and with a sharp yank, tore it from the man's grasp. A second tendril whipped out, wrapping around the guard's ankle and pulling, sending him crashing to the metal floor. The chaos intensified. Just as the guards began to realize they were being flanked, a gleeful shriek erupted from behind their barricade. Toga, her face split in a wide, bloodthirsty grin, vaulted over their cover, knives flashing. Her sudden appearance in their rear threw them into utter disarray. Their fortified position became a trap. The firefight devolved into a brutal, close-quarters melee. Muscular finally crashed into the barricade, scattering men and metal like bowling pins. He grabbed one guard by the head, his massive hand enveloping the man's helmet, and used him as a human shield before tossing him into two of his comrades. Izuku moved through the fight like a surgeon, his every move calculated to neutralize, not kill. A precision kick to a knee joint here, a Black Whip restraint there, an Air Force blast to disarm a trio of guards at once. He was a whirlwind of motion, constantly intervening, trying to mitigate the carnage his own team was inflicting. He saw Muscular raise a fist to pulp a downed guard and immediately fired a compressed air bullet into the brute's shoulder, knocking him off balance. "He's down, Muscular! Objective!" Izuku yelled over the din. Muscular shot him a look of pure murder but turned his attention to another standing opponent. Stain was a different kind of terror. He moved with a dancer's grace and a butcher's purpose, his katana a blur. He wasn't killing, Izuku realized with a jolt of shock. He was systematically and brutally dismembering. A slice to a hamstring. A slash across a bicep to sever the muscle. A quick cut to the tendons behind a knee. He was leaving a trail of crippled, screaming men in his wake, taking them out of the war not just for a day, but forever. It was a cruelty that was somehow more personal, more chilling, than Muscular's mindless slaughter. In less than a minute it was over. The last guard fell, courtesy of a giggling toga who had managed to get a taste of his blood, and use his form to order his last remaining squad mate to drop his weapon. The cavernous room was suddenly quiet, save for the hum of machinery, the ragged panting of the combatants, and the groans of the wounded and crippled scattered across the catwalk. Before them stood a single, massive blast door, the word Central Control stenciled on it in faded yellow paint. La Brava, we're at the door, Izuku said, his chest heaving. Get it open, already on it. Her voice replied, the calm in the storm. Heavy-duty magnetic and tumbler lock system. A relic, but a tough one. Give me a moment, routing power, bypassing sequence, there. With a deep thud and the grinding of ancient gears, the massive blast door began to retract into the ceiling, revealing the room beyond. The control room was not what he expected. It wasn't a clean, sterile environment of blinking lights and tidy consoles. It was a nest. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, all were coated in a thick, pulsating layer of viscous brown sludge. The substance pulsed with a faint, sickly inner light, like bioluminescent sewage. Pipes and conduits that should have been steel were now coated in the same filth, looking more like cancerous veins and arteries. And in the center of it all, fused with the main control console, was the source. The sludge villain was no longer the simple, desperate thief Izuku had first encountered years ago. All for One's gifts had transformed him into something monstrous. He was a semi-liquid behemoth, a mountain of filth and malice, his form constantly shifting and bubbling. Dozens of glowing yellow eyes scattered randomly across his mass, swiveled to fixate on them. Thick, powerful tendrils of sludge snaked through the room, plugged directly into power conduits and data ports. He was no longer just in the control room. He was the control room. He had become the cancerous heart of the facility. And he wasn't alone. Embedded in the wall of sludge behind him, held fast by thick, semi-translucent tendrils, were two people. A man and a woman, both in grease-stained blue plant worker jumpsuits. They were conscious, their eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to have stolen their voices. Their chests rose and fell in shallow, panicked bursts. They were human shields of the most horrifying kind. Well, well, a voice gurgled, seeming to emanate from the entire room at once. It was the sludge villain's voice, but deeper now, amplified and distorted by the machinery he was fused with. One of his larger eyes, the size of a dinner plate, focused on Izuku. If it isn't the little hero. The one that got away. Look at you! All dressed in black, running with killers. And look at me! I'm not just a villain anymore. I'm infrastructure. We've both come a long way, haven't we? Muscular scoffed. So the big bad is a talking pile of crap. Let's just end this. He took a step forward, his muscles beginning to coil. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The sludge villain gurgled, a sound that might have been a laugh. A section of his body turned translucent, revealing a complex network of wires and glowing red devices embedded within his core. It was a bomb. A massive one. The big man, all for one, gave me more than just power. He gave me a purpose. A dead man's switch. My vital signs are hardwired to every explosive charge in this facility's foundation. If my heart stops, well, let's just say this whole quadrant is going to get a new, very deep lake. He paused, letting the threat sink in. So here's the deal, heroes. He spat the word like a curse. You turn around. You walk away. You give me a 12-hour head start to consolidate my new territory. You do that, and these two live. A slimy tendril stroked the cheek of the terrified woman, who flinched violently. You try anything, and I mean anything, and I'll detonate it all myself. The plant, the hostages, you, me, all of it. A glorious, muddy grave. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and absolute. A perfect trap. They couldn't kill him. They couldn't let him go. So what? Muscular grunted, unimpressed. Just kill them all. The hostages, the sludge ball, who cares? The mission is to secure the facility. Kageyama said collateral damage was fine. Let's blow this pop stand and go home. He's right, Toga added, tilting her head. It would be a very sad, very beautiful tragedy. All that screaming, Stain remained silent, his gaze fixed on Izuku. This was the moment. The crucible. He wasn't watching the villain or the hostages. He was watching the hero's soul be weighed on the scales. Izuku's mind was a maelstrom. Muscular's brutal logic was, terrifyingly, in line with their mission parameters. Kageyama would approve. Sacrificing two to save thousands from the poison. It was the cold, hard math of their new world. He could feel the stares of his squad mates on him, feel the weight of the decision pressing down. The faces of the two hostages, their eyes pleading, burned into his brain. As if summoned by his thoughts, Kageyama's voice sliced into his comms, for his ears only. It was as cold and sharp as an icicle to the heart. Your team is correct, Midoriya. The calculation is simple. The hostages are an acceptable loss. Izuku's blood ran cold. The facility is the objective. She continued, her voice an emotionless monotone. The lives of two civilians are irrelevant when measured against the strategic value of this plant and the thousands of lives threatened by the toxin. Your hesitation is a liability. Eliminate the target. Now, that is a direct order. He stood frozen, trapped between his lifelong code and a direct command from the woman who held his life in her hands. He could see no way out. No solution that didn't end in blood. And then it got worse. A new element appeared on his HUD. In the upper right corner, a series of crimson numbers blinked to life, accompanied by a soft, insistent beep that only he could hear. Termination sequence initiated 00:30, 00:29, 00:28. Kageyama wasn't just ordering him. She was forcing his hand. 30 seconds. 30 seconds to obey her order and murder everyone in the room, or she would murder him. The beeping was the ticking of his own life clock. Panic, pure and primal, seized him. His breath hitched. The collar around his neck suddenly felt ice cold, a chilling promise of the oblivion to come. 00:22. He could hear All Might's voice in his head, a memory, a ghost. A hero is someone who smashes through those walls and saves everyone. He looked at the hostages. At the smirking, gurgling monster. At the timer. 00:17. My life, or my soul. Kageyama's world, her cold equations of acceptable loss, her brutal pragmatism, he could accept it. He could pull the trigger. He could live. But the person who walked out of this room would not be him. It would be her weapon, her monster, a hollowed-out shell wearing his face. No. 00:11. No. He would not kill them. He would not sacrifice the innocent to save himself. He would not become her. He was Deku. He was a hero. And heroes save people. All of them. 00:07. A desperate, insane plan, a flicker of an idea born of pure desperation, ignited in his mind. It was reckless. It was suicidal. It would require a level of power and control he wasn't sure he possessed. But it was the only way. 00:04. He took a deep breath, the ozonated air searing his lungs. Kageyama, he whispered, a final act of defiance. Go to hell. 00:03. He planted his feet, sinking into a low stance. 00:02. One for all. 45%. 00:01. Power, raw and cataclysmic, erupted from him. It was not the controlled burn of 8%. This was a wildfire. Green lightning, thick as his arm, raged around his body, tearing at his suit, scorching the metal floor beneath his feet. The muscles in his legs and back screamed in protest, threatening to tear themselves apart under the strain. The pain was excruciating, a supernova of agony, but he gritted his teeth and pushed through it. He roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated power and defiance. He didn't punch. He didn't kick. He spun, putting every ounce of this cataclysmic power into a rotational force. St. Louis smash. Cyclone! He thrust both hands forward, palms open, and unleashed the vortex. The air in the control room seemed to fold in on itself. A miniature tornado, a cyclone of focused, furious air, erupted from his hands. Papers, loose debris, and small pieces of equipment were instantly sucked into the maelstrom. The sludge villain roared in surprise and rage as the immense suction force latched onto his semi-liquid body. His form, which had been a stable mountain of filth, began to stretch and distort, pulled inexorably towards the vortex. He was being peeled away from the console, from the walls, his tendrils ripping free from their ports with showers of sparks. But the plan had two parts. Even as his body screamed under the strain of maintaining the cyclone, Izuku's mind was a focal point of absolute concentration. Black Whip! The dark tendrils erupted from his back and shoulders, not as a chaotic storm, but as precise, intelligent instruments. They bypassed the raging vortex, weaving through the storm of flying debris. They shot past the flailing, dissolving form of the sludge villain. They reached the two hostages. The tendrils didn't crush or constrict. They wrapped around the workers' torsos with impossible gentleness, firm but not constricting, like a rescuer's arms. Hold on! Izuku bellowed, the words torn from his throat. With a final, desperate roar of exertion that shredded his vocal cords, he performed two actions at once. He pushed with the cyclone and pulled with Black Whip. It was an impossible feat of physics and will. A human tug-of-war against a hurricane of his own making. The sludge villain was ripped free from the wall, his monstrous form disintegrating into 1,000 smaller blobs as he was sucked into the heart of the vortex, his agonized gurgles lost in the screaming wind. Simultaneously, the two hostages were yanked free from the dissolving mass, flying through the air towards Izuku. He angled his body, killing the cyclone in the same instant he pulled the hostages behind him, using his own back as a shield as they tumbled onto the catwalk. Silence descended, broken only by the hiss of dying sparks, the drip of residual sludge, and Izuku's own ragged, agonized gasps. He fell to one knee, his body trembling uncontrollably. The backlash from using 45% was immense. His arms felt like they were filled with molten glass, and his vision swam with black spots. The timer on his HUD was gone. He was alive. He had done it. He had saved them. He looked up. The hostages were huddled together, shaken but unharmed. The control room was a wreck, but the central console was intact, and the sludge villain was now just a collection of inert, quivering puddles scattered across the room, the bomb within him disarmed and disconnected. Muscular was staring, his jaw slack, his bravado momentarily forgotten. He had just witnessed a level of power that dwarfed his own, wielded with a control he couldn't comprehend. Toga looked almost disappointed that no one had exploded, but her eyes were fixed on Izuku's trembling, powerful form with a new, feverish intensity. Kageyama's voice over the comms was silent. For the first time, she had no words. But it was Stain's reaction that anchored Izuku. The hero killer stood perfectly still, his katana held loosely at his side. He was looking at Izuku, and his intense, fanatical eyes were wide. The expression on the visible part of his face was not one of mockery or pity. It was something else entirely. It was a look of profound, stunned stillness, as if he had just witnessed a miracle or a heresy, and was no longer sure which was which. In a world of monsters and pragmatists, in a cage with a bomb on his neck, under a direct order to commit murder, Izuku Midoriya had stared into the abyss and refused to blink. He had risked everything, his mission, his life, for two strangers. Stain had just seen an act of true, selfless, impossible heroism. And in the grim silence of the ruined control room, he was forced to wonder if the age of heroes was truly as dead as he believed. The journey back was a study in oppressive silence. The transport, which had felt cramped and suffocating on the way in, now felt cavernous, each member of the squad isolated in their own pocket of the aftermath. The adrenaline had leached away, leaving behind a thick, cloying residue of what they had done. The air, still carrying the faint, metallic scent of blood and the sharp tang of ozone, was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Muscular was sullen, slumped in his seat, his massive arms crossed over his chest. The gleeful, blood-drunk high had worn off, replaced by a brooding resentment. He had been denied his catharsis, his charge for the kill interrupted by the very hero he despised. Worse, he had witnessed a display of power that made his own brutal strength feel crude and limited. He kept shooting dark, venomous glances at Izuku, a mixture of fury and a grudging, hateful respect simmering in his single eye. Toga was in her own world. She sat with her knees hugged to her chest, her head tilted, staring at Izuku with an unnerving analytical intensity. The manic energy was gone, replaced by a focused, almost scientific curiosity. She wasn't looking at a playmate anymore. She was looking at a puzzle, a fascinating paradox of overwhelming power and frustrating restraint. Her obsession had deepened, shifting from a simple, violent crush to something more complex, more possessive. She wanted to understand what made him tick, and her methods for understanding things were invariably invasive and bloody. Stain was a statue carved from shadow and conviction. He sat in the corner, motionless, his katana resting across his lap. His eyes, visible through the gaps in his bandages, were fixed on Izuku, but their fanatical fire was banked, replaced by a deep, contemplative stillness. He was processing what he had seen, fitting it into the rigid, bloody framework of his worldview. The boy had disobeyed a direct order. He had risked mission failure. He had acted with blatant, suicidal foolishness. By every metric of the hero-killer's doctrine, he should have been a target for purging. And yet, the reason for that foolishness, the sheer, irrational conviction behind the act, had struck a chord deep within Stain's warped soul. He was re-evaluating. The verdict was not yet in. Izuku sat apart from them all, feeling the bone-deep ache that was the price of 45%. His muscles trembled with phantom agony, and each breath was a painful reminder of his shredded vocal cords. But the physical pain was a distant drumbeat compared to the raging storm in his mind. He had succeeded. The hostages were alive, the villain neutralized, the facility secure. By his own code, it was a victory, but he had achieved it by unleashing a torrent of power so violent it terrified him, and he had done so in a direct, suicidal act of defiance against the woman who held the key to the bomb in his neck. The timer on his HUD was gone, but the collar remained, a cold, heavy reality against his skin. He hadn't won his freedom. He had only postponed his execution. The silence from Kageyama was more terrifying than any threat. The transport docked with a smooth, final thud. The ramp lowered not to a hangar, but to a sterile, white debriefing bay, identical to the one in Tartarus. A squad of black-clad guards waited for them, their rifles held at a low ready. There were no congratulations. No welcome back. They were herded out like livestock, their weapons and gear collected with cold efficiency. Imasuji, Toga, Akiguro. Return to your cells, one of the guards commanded, his voice flat and amplified by his helmet. Midoriya. The director will see you now. Muscular grunted and stomped off, flanked by two guards. Toga gave Izuku a final, lingering look and a little wave before she was escorted away. Stain rose, gave Izuku one last, unreadable glance, and walked off under his own power, the guards keeping a respectful, wary distance. Izuku was left alone with four guards, who formed a diamond formation around him. They led him not to a briefing room, but down a series of stark, unfamiliar corridors to a heavy, soundproof door. It slid open to reveal a room that was part medical bay, part interrogation chamber. In the center stood a single chair, identical to the one he had woken up in. It was a clear, unambiguous message. Director Kageyama was waiting for him. She stood with her arms crossed, her posture a rigid column of disapproval. Her cold gray eyes held no trace of relief or satisfaction. They held only the flat, dangerous calm of a predator whose authority had been challenged. Sit, she commanded. It was not a request. Izuku, his body screaming in protest, lowered himself into the chair. The restraints, as if on cue, snapped shut around his wrists, ankles, and torso, locking him in place. Kageyama walked a slow circle around him, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Let us review your performance, shall we, Midoriya? She began, her voice deceptively soft. You were given a simple mission: infiltrate a facility, neutralize a threat, secure an asset. You were given a team of specialists perfectly suited for a swift, lethal operation. She stopped in front of him, her eyes boring into his. Instead, you chose to indulge in moral posturing. Your insistence on a no-kill policy resulted in the immediate failure of the infiltration, the alerting of all hostile forces, and the unnecessary deaths of at least two of the villain's guards in the chaos that followed. Your direct subordinate, Imasuji, disobeyed your orders because you had already created an environment where discipline was secondary to your personal philosophy. Her voice grew colder, sharper. You then found yourself in a hostage situation. A classic tactical problem with a clear, logical solution. A solution your teammates, hardened realists that they are, immediately identified. A solution that I, your commanding officer, ordered you to execute. She leaned in, her face inches from his. And you refused. A direct, unequivocal act of insubordination. You chose to risk the entire mission, the lives of thousands in the Western Bloc, and the integrity of this entire operation, for the sake of 2 civilian factory workers who, in the grand calculus of this war, are statistically irrelevant. They weren't irrelevant to me, Izuku rasped, his throat raw. That, Kageyama said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, is precisely the problem. She straightened up, pacing again. You were lucky. Your reckless, suicidal gamble paid off. The hostages are alive, the facility is secure. The villain is neutralized. On paper, this mission is a resounding success. And that is the only reason you are not a fine red mist decorating the walls of that control room right now. She stopped and turned to face him, a cruel, thin smile touching her lips. But insubordination, no matter how successful, cannot go unpunished. Discipline must be maintained. You need to understand Midoriya, in your very bones, who is in command. You need to be reminded of the nature of your leash. She picked up a small, handheld device from a nearby tray. It was sleek and black, with a single glass-tipped stylus. The device on your neck is more than just a bomb. It is a neurological interface. It has been mapping your neural pathways since the moment it was attached. It knows how you think. It knows what you feel. And it can be adjusted. She walked toward him, the device held delicately in her hand. We cannot have our most valuable weapon making decisions based on sentiment. Your emotional responses are a flaw in the system, a bug that needs to be patched. So, we are going to perform a recalibration. She pressed the stylus to a small port on the side of his collar. A low hum started, vibrating directly into his spine. It was a deeply unpleasant sensation, like a dentist's drill against his soul. This will be unpleasant, she said, with no trace of sympathy. Think of it as aversion therapy. We are going to associate the concept of defiance, of emotional, heroic impulses, with a negative stimulus. We will teach your very nervous system that following your heart leads to pain. Eventually you will learn to prefer the cold, clean logic of obedience. The hum intensified. Izuku's teeth began to chatter. A cold dread, colder than anything he'd felt in the fight, began to creep up his spine. Initiating recalibration sequence, she said, her eyes watching his face with detached, clinical interest. It wasn't a shock. It was worse. It started as a cold fire in the base of his skull, where the collar met his spine. It wasn't the searing heat of an open flame, but the biting, invasive cold of liquid nitrogen. The sensation spread, following the paths of his nerves, a lattice of pure agony spreading through his body. He could feel it tracing his spinal cord, branching out to his limbs. His memories flashed before his eyes, warped and corrupted by the pain. All Might's smiling face, now associated with a spike of ice-cold agony in his chest. Uraraka's cheerful wave, now linked to a searing pain behind his eyes. The memory of pulling the hostages to safety, the feeling of defiant triumph, was now being overwritten, systematically paired with the sensation of his own neurons screaming in protest. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to fight it, trying to hold on to the purity of those memories. But the device was relentless. It was an intrusion of the deepest kind, a violation of his very self. He thrashed against the restraints, a choked, animal sound of pain tearing from his ruined throat. Kageyama watched, her expression unchanging. She was not a sadist who enjoyed his pain. She was a mechanic, tuning an engine. He was not a person to her. He was a faulty machine being brought back into line. The process lasted for what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a minute. When it finally stopped, the cold fire receded, leaving behind a profound, trembling exhaustion and a deep, lingering ache in his soul. The memories were still there, but they were tainted now, like beautiful paintings spattered with filth. He was left panting in the chair, his body slick with a cold sweat. Kageyama placed the device back on the tray with a soft click. The lesson for today is complete, she said, her voice once again calm and businesslike. You are a tool, Midoriya. A weapon, and a weapon does not question the hand that wields it. Do not make me remind you again. She turned and walked to the door. Have him taken to the infirmary to recover from his quirk-induced strain. Then confine him to his cell. The door slid shut, leaving him alone with the guards and the ghost of the pain that now clung to his most cherished moments. The infirmary was as Spartan as the rest of the facility. A narrow cot, a vital signs monitor that beeped with quiet monotony, and white walls that seemed to absorb all warmth and hope. Izuku lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. A nutrient-rich four dripped into his arm, a clinical solution to the exhaustion that had settled deep into his bones. The after-effects of 45% were a dull, throbbing concert of pain in his muscles, but it was nothing compared to the phantom ache left by the recalibration. He felt hollowed out. Violated. He had won the battle at the water plant, but here, in the silence of Kageyama's prison, he had suffered a devastating defeat. She hadn't just hurt his body, she had laid her hands on his soul. He closed his eyes, and the image of the hostages' terrified faces flashed in his mind. The image was immediately followed by a faint, ghostly echo of that ice-cold agony. He flinched. The therapy was working. The door to the infirmary hissed open, and he tensed, expecting a guard or Kageyama herself. But the footsteps were too light. He opened his eyes to see La Brava standing hesitantly in the doorway. She looked small and lost in her gray jumpsuit, her bright pink hair a defiant splash of color in the sterile environment. She was holding something in her hands, a sealed, full-wrapped packet. A high-energy nutrient pack, the kind they gave to operatives after strenuous missions. She stood there for a long moment, wrestling with herself. Her cynical, protective shell was at war with some older, kinder instinct. Finally, she seemed to come to a decision. She walked over to his cot, her eyes carefully avoiding his, and placed the nutrient pack on the small table beside him. You'll need this, she mumbled, her voice barely a whisper. The 4 is just baseline. This will help with the muscle regeneration. Thank you, Izuku rasped, his voice still a painful gravel. She just nodded, still not looking at him. She turned to leave, her part in this uncomfortable interaction seemingly over. La Brava, Izuku said, forcing himself to speak again. Why? She stopped, her back to him. Her small shoulders were tense. I don't know, she admitted, her voice tight. She finally turned, and he saw the conflict in her eyes. The haunted, broken look was still there, but it was warring with something else, something fragile and new. Gentle, she started, her voice cracking. She took a shaky breath. He was an idiot. A foolish, theatrical, wonderful idiot. He never hurt anyone who didn't deserve it. He just wanted to make a name for himself, to make people smile, to prove that even a failure could be a hero in his own way. Her gaze finally met his, and he saw a flicker of the passionate woman he'd once faced. What you did back there, for those 2 workers, risking everything for no reason, for no reward, just because it was the right thing to do. It was foolish. It was reckless. It was insane. She paused, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. He would have liked what you did, she whispered. He would have stood up and applauded. The admission hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge of shared grief over a dead ideal. I got so tired, she continued, her voice thick with unshed tears. Tired of watching good men die for nothing. When they killed him, something in me just broke. It seemed easier to not care, to just do the work, follow the orders, and survive. But watching you, it's harder to not care than I thought. She wiped her eye with the back of her hand, a flicker of her old cynical mask returning. Don't get me wrong. You're still going to die. Kageyama will see to that. We're all on death row here. But, she looked at him one last time. Today, you weren't just her weapon. For a few minutes you were a hero. It was nice to see one again. Even if it was for the last time. Without another word, she turned and walked out, the door hissing shut behind her, leaving Izuku alone with her small, impossible gift, a crack in the facade of despair, a shared moment of hope in the heart of the abyss. Hours later, Izuku sat on the edge of the hard slab that served as a bed in his cell. The nutrient pack was gone, and the 4 drip had restored some of his physical strength, but the exhaustion in his soul remained. The cell was a cube of gray concrete and steel, featureless except for the toilet in the corner, and the unforgiving glare of the light panels in the ceiling. It was a place designed to strip away identity, to reduce a person to a number. He replayed the day's events in his mind, dissecting them. The victory at the plant felt increasingly hollow. He had saved 2 people, but what had it cost him? He had unleashed terrifying power. He had exposed himself to Kageyama. He had subjected himself to her monstrous reconditioning. He was a hero who had won by becoming a bigger threat, a prisoner who had defied his warden only to have his chains tightened. Was this the only way forward? A path of Pyrrhic victories and escalating self-destruction? A flicker of movement in the shadows by the door made him look up. The door to his cell hadn't opened, yet someone was there. Stain stepped out of the deepest shadows, his form materializing as if coalescing from the darkness itself. He moved with an utter lack of sound, his presence a heavy weight in the small room. "You reek of it." Stain's voice rasped, cutting through the silence. Izuku got to his feet, his body instinctively tensing. "Reek of what? Hypocrisy!" Stain spat, the word dripping with contempt. He took a slow step forward, his eyes burning with their familiar fanaticism. "You preach a doctrine of non-lethal force, yet you ally yourself with killers. You fight to save the innocent, yet your actions are commanded by a soulless monster who sees human life as a rounding error. You wear the face of a hero, but you accept the collar of a slave. You are a walking contradiction. What would you have done?" Izuku shot back, a surge of anger cutting through his exhaustion. "Let them die. Let Kageyama win. Do not presume to compare your naive dilemma to my conviction," Stain hissed. He was closer now, close enough for Izuku to see the mad clarity in his eyes. "I would have done what was necessary. I would have purged the filth. The true filth. The guards? The villain? Them?" Stain scoffed, a dismissive wave of his hand. "They were symptoms. Common street trash, unworthy of the title of villain. The brutish fool, Imasuji, he is also filth, a rabid dog who kills for sport, with no philosophy, no purpose. He taints the very concept of strength." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "No. I speak of the true monster on the field today. The one with the cold voice and the clean hands, the one who ordered the execution of innocence for the sake of a balance sheet. The director." Izuku stared, taken aback. "She is the culmination of the disease I have fought my entire life." Stain continued, his voice a low, venomous sermon. "The heroism of the HPSC, stripped of its flashy costumes and false smiles, revealed for what it truly is, a system of control, of cold, pragmatic violence, where ideals are a liability and human life is a resource. She is a true villain. A false hero of the highest order. She is worthy of purging." "And what about me?" Izuku asked, his voice quiet. "Am I worthy of purging too?" Stain was silent for a long moment, studying him. "I do not know," he finally admitted, and the uncertainty in his voice was perhaps the most shocking thing Izuku had heard all day. "When the director gave you the order, I expected you to obey. To save your own life. To become the weapon she wants you to be. It was the logical choice. The pragmatic choice. The choice any of the fakes would have made." He took the final step, standing directly in front of Izuku. "But you did not. You chose an act of spectacular, suicidal foolishness. You risked everything for an ideal. In that moment your actions were not logical. They were not efficient. They were not pragmatic. They were pure. It was the mark of a true hero." The words, coming from the man who had crippled his brother's mentor, sent a shudder through Izuku. "Do not mistake this for admiration," Stain warned, his voice hardening again. "You are still a fool. You still cling to a code that is obsolete in this broken world. But you are an anomaly. A specimen, perhaps the last of a dead species." He reached out, not to attack, but to lightly touch the metal collar on Izuku's neck. His touch was cold, dry, like old paper. "This collar is a lie," Stain whispered, his eyes blazing. "She thinks it controls you. But the true battle is not here." He tapped Izuku's chest, right over his heart. It is here. Can the soul of a hero survive when it is caged in the body of a monster? Can your fire burn bright enough to incinerate the hypocrisy you are drowning in, or will it be snuffed out by the filth? He pulled his hand back. I will be watching you, Izuku Midoriya. I will be your shadow. I will push you. I will test you, and I will see if you are truly the last ember of heroism in this world, or just another pretty flame, destined to flicker and die, leaving only ashes. Stain stepped back into the shadows, and as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. Izuku was alone again in the featureless gray cell, the silence ringing in his ears. He was no longer just a prisoner of Director Kageyama. He was now the subject of a far more dangerous, far more personal scrutiny. He had gained the obsessive attention of a zealot who would not hesitate to become his judge, jury, and executioner. The facades of his enemies were cracking, revealing the complex monsters beneath. But as he looked down at his own trembling hands, he had to wonder about the cracks forming in his own.